So let's move on to the next panel, where we have great speakers. One is Christian De Cuna, which was moderator, which was introduced previously. Just for those that just joined, he is an official EU Commission, and he worked very closely with the EDPS, the top European official of the European Union, and also managed to work on his manifesto on privacy. So he's a very big expert and activist in the privacy sphere. We have Paul Nemitz, which is also an EU official, which has had several different roles as principal advisors, as director of fundamental rights, so working in different areas of civil rights at very high level in the European Commission, and recently has been leading initiatives to have AI accountability, the governance of AI, which of course it's absolutely crucial. And so Paul is also an advisor to our company, and that's very appreciated. The other speakers that we have is a very well-renowned person and with amazing expertise, Troels. He has been previously was at Europol. He was leading the head of the Cybersecurity Center there at Europol. Then he was at the Barclays Bank, a very large bank, managing as a CISO there. And then he was head of the Cybersecurity Center at the World Economic Forum. So a very influential position where he worked on public-private initiatives in this space, and so he has a very wide view, I think, as wide as anyone could have on the state and non-state aspects of this of the dynamics at play. And so we're very honored to have that. So I forgot to mention the theme of the panel, which I will do just now. So the theme of the panel is to explore if a democratic international certification body, similar to the one we're proposing, could take a whole different shape, but if there's a space of something similar, creating an institution that can actually be trusted to provide radically more secure levels of security, but at the same time providing mechanisms which are that enable governments, if they have legitimate authority, to actually access the information. So reconciling, if this is something that could be done, and actually more than if, also more how. No? So basically, Troels is also an advisor, and so we could actually look at how, what are the major challenges. So I would open up just with a question with Troels, which regards some recent news. We all read about the Anom affair, in which the FBI and the Australian police, it came out a few weeks ago that they organized an operation by which they created a secure device company 3 years ago, and they make so that over 3 years, 12,000 drug dealers actually ended up using these devices, and at some point they racked the net in. Maybe that wasn't their decision. Sometimes it's just opportunistic decisions in these operations. And there were 800 people arrested, and a little bit of cash and money seized. I mean, the numbers looks high, but if you look at the numbers of the drug trade, it's 0.05%. So it wasn't really getting the big fishes. That very similar operation called Phantom Secures, but even operations that Western states have made not for free gangs, but for robbers. So we could imagine that the crypto again was somewhat similar, because the Western governments, they came together and they acquired a company in Switzerland that was selling super secure communication devices to a lot of third nations of the world. That came out that it had a backdoor. So as a difference between Anom and instead the crypto again, you could be actually quite sure that only the CIA and the German security service could actually read and hack these systems, and that was an important part of the Cold War and who prevailed. Instead, on these other means by which law enforcement now creates these secure devices, which go on the market, and sometimes they're used by criminals, but also they're used by journalists, people that are trying to protect their privacy. And so these operations, by the police and possibly other operations that weaken security, it seems that ultimately they actually, on one side, they stop crime. On the other side, they promote crime because those people using these devices and thinking that they're secure, they're actually vulnerable to being hacked by criminals. So as a former law enforcement at a very high level, this dichotomy in which this operation very successful, they bust some crime, but at the same time, in order to do that, they're creating a lot of crime. Now, enabling a lot of crime of people believing in the security and actually being hacked. And you could say a lot of people believe in the iPhone, and maybe they shouldn't as much for their profile. So it's a long question, Troels. I hope it falls in your ballpark. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Rufo. And thank you again for inviting me here. And I've been really listening into what has been discussed previously in the conference. And I'm not optimistic because there is a lot of obstacles, of course, and there is a lot of, unfortunately, hindrances to make the internet safe and secure. But back to your question, I've been both a spy, so I've been head of the Danish CIA, and I've also been a police officer, and I've used undercover methods both on the internet and in the physical world. And I think that there is a distinction between what nation states does as spy agencies and then what law enforcement does to combat crime. And I think part of the problem we are having today is that we are putting everything in the same basket. That is why it's so difficult for law enforcement to do something about criminals, because you think that it's FSB who is behind and you cannot cooperate with the FSB. I think it's basically greedy criminals that operates out of Russia, and I think we should cooperate on that. But I think that we have a problem in putting everything in the same basket. I agree with you that there's always problems when you allow law enforcement to violate the law in order to obtain something. Why we do this on the internet is because the criminals have all the hands, all the cards on their hands and all the trumps. They can encrypt everything, they can encrypt the speaking, they can encrypt texting, they can encrypt whatever. And they need to communicate, but we cannot decrypt that as law enforcement. So the only, let's say, other solution is to give them the equipment that they want to communicate on. And then, of course, you are the one who are in charge of what is going to be listened to. And that's, of course, one of them. The other one is the one that was made by the CIA and the German police. And I think they have other sets of rules that are not law enforcement rules. And I think they have much wider rules to operate. And the problem on the internet is, first of all, we have no norms for nation states. So it is basically the Wild West. There are no norms at all. You can attack, you could do whatever you want. And the problem with the internet is that even the smallest state, even my own Danish small state, we want to be offensive on the internet, and we will train that because we know that we need to be in that league. So there will be more and more insecurity, and we need norms. And because we have no norms here between nation state, then we have no cooperation between law enforcement. And I know this for a fact. When I was the director of the European Cybercrime Center, I had loads of muscles, but no information. When I moved to Barclays, I had all the informations in the world, but no muscles. And when I tried to see if I could interact with Western law enforcement to attack and help Russian police to do their job in Russia, I simply got a no. We cannot cooperate because of geopolitical tension. So the problem is that because of the geopolitical tension, in my point of view, it's risk-free to be a cyber criminal these days. There are no risks at all. So it's no risk, low investment, high profit. And that means that this crime will search in the internet. And that's why we need initiative like yours, Rufo, to find a solution for how we, in one way or another, can make it better tomorrow than today. Because we have had the internet for almost 40 years, and we are still using proxies and endpoint securities and VPNs, and it doesn't work right. So we need to find a way how we can change that. And this is, of course, what we have discussed today, balancing security with privacy. And I think it's not, as you know, an easy question, but at least I know from my time in the World Economic Forum, that when I started my job there, after being in the front line in a private company, in the front line in law enforcement, I was suddenly in the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab, the chairman, said to me, Troels, could you do me a favor? You travel to Washington, then you travel to Moscow, then you travel to Beijing, then you travel to London, then you travel to Brussels, and then you go to Delhi, and you end up in Tel Aviv. You ask all governments, do you think we should do something together to make the internet safer, both for nation states, but for criminals, but start with the criminals? Every city I was in, they answered me, yes, we want to be part of that. We actually want to do something in that area. And then, I don't know what happened, but the geopolitical tensions, they increased. I think that even in Europe, they had doubts about where the US was going during the Trump presidency. Were they going to isolate US? Was it US first and then the rest of the world second? And there was other rules of the game that blurred up that. But at least there was a willingness to do something. And I think that we should create a platform of the willing instead of trying to find everybody to have a consensus, because we will never agree. So we have to create a coalition of the willing that wants to make a difference. Those who wants to join can join. Those who just want to sit on the fence, they can watch from the fence. But you need to do something, because this cannot go on forever. And this lawlessness that we see right now is actually blowing loads of distrust to the internet. And by that also, it will not be able to give the same back to us that the internet could. And I don't want to promote fear. I want to protect hope, but it's very difficult in these days to do that. But I think this is the way that we need to do it. And I appreciate very much your initiative, and you need to continue to do so. And you need just to walk on, because nobody else is doing anything right now.
Oh, I thank you so much for these words, Troel, for the initiative that we're bringing together with Nick, John, and all the other advisors. So we're very, I mean, you made some very insightful comments, and also from the height of your experience, and also you give us some good hopes. You said that in these trips you took around the world, there were like actually willingness to come together on this. And in fact, for the last 3 years, we've been talking to many governments, from the German military, Ministry of Interior, Italian Secret Service, Switzerland, Israel. Now next week we'll have a talk to Israel. We've been invited to go there, very high up, and so it's hard to get the right bandwidth, because it's confidential stuff. Usually you only get to talk in person, and you get COVID. But now I think diplomacy has moved to Zoom, so maybe some things can actually happen on Zoom that would never have happened before. So maybe through you could also help maybe bring some of these people on the follow-up conversation. And so this is very interesting. Also, thanks for making the distinction between the police and the intelligence world, which are separated as far as operation goals and so on. Sometimes the techniques are similar. So basically, that's why I wanted to make a difference, because the technique that was used on CryptoAG at least didn't have the side effect of having anybody going and spying on these nations, because they did it right, because it was technically a very well designed backdoor. Whereas operations like Anom or Phantom Secure, or any of the weakening happening, those are backdoors, which you have these vulnerabilities which end up there. They're just there. They're discovered. They're not plugged. They're not communicated. And then by design, these are then exploited by many others. And so you have much more collateral damage there. So this is also, it brings a little bit to our solutions. So our solution, basically, CryptoAG demonstrated that you can create a backdoor that only the specific entities can break. So if you do it really well, very carefully, we're pretty sure that only they could do it. I mean, of course, you could challenge that CIA and BND shouldn't have done it. They probably should have done it in a multilateral way, but that was a different era. It had its role. So, but that it proves wrong certain experts that have always said that any front door mechanisms will always be exploitable by others, or very likely so. Of course, you never have the certainty. If you have systems which are ultra high assurance, and you apply the same extreme safeguards that you apply to creating these devices to the mechanism which you're designing the back door in it, or in our case, a front door, then you can radically mitigate the risk of abuse of this front door mechanism. And so there's been, I think, many of the people from my field. Now, I come from the privacy, open source movement, e-democracy. I lost nearly all my friends over the years because they've seen this guy that used to be for privacy and now is building a front door, and they went overboard. With the fear of the clipper chip, they created all these papers exaggerating how impossible it is to do this, at least in certain domains. And so we're not saying that creating a front door mechanism is feasible in current technologies. That's not feasible. It's not feasible by a nation. You cannot impose it. So there's so many no's for the traditional ideas of doing a backdoor existing technology. What we're doing, we're creating something that, so our goal is not to create access to government. Governments are mostly fine. Government have a lot of awareness. The problem is that we don't have privacy. Most of the activists of privacy have been on the defense mode, right? Trying to stop governments to create a backdoor. There's nothing to defend. There's really nearly no privacy. We only have Signal on an iPhone, which can be hacked by a teenager over there. And so the whole mind of my friends in this movement is completely misallocated. And law enforcement has played along because to that extent, I mean, if there is a perception that they're going dark and so on, it's good. And they maintain a situation which overall gives a high visibility. Look at the success since 2011 and the attacks in Europe. The fact that we didn't have terrorist attacks is not a coincidence. It's not because there are less people wanting to do terrorist attacks. It's just an incredible success of this surveillance apparatus that was put in place. The problem is that this apparatus has huge collateral damage, which in turn comes to security. So, I guess the intervention of Troels was just so enticing that my answer took on a lot, and whereas I was supposed to be more of a moderator in this panel. So let me pass on a word now to Paul that we introduced before, which brings an amazing insight here from all points of view, and it brings also a very activist point of view, from the civil rights point of view. Paul, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Rufo, and sorry to be a little bit late. I will be very short. I would like to say that first of all, data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity, including trustless systems, in the future, they have to go hand in hand. I think it doesn't make sense to separate all these different needs and requirements. And so I think we are facing both a technological challenge, but also a governance challenge. And I am very interested in promoting trustless systems, provided the governance is such that we can be sure that it is, let's say, free of inappropriate influence, that there is the necessary controllability and transparency. And of course, in terms of viability from an economic point of view, I think there are different models. I find, for example, very interesting the American model of the EFF, the American Civil Rights Organization, which has started this activity of Let's Encrypt. It's of course a different thing than what we are talking about, but it is a model of offering a service for free, entirely sponsored by around 90 private donors who have an interest in developing, let's say, this technology space, and who sponsor the certification mechanism as part of, on the one hand, a public interest contribution, but on the other hand, a contribution to developing an ecosystem in which they also have an economic interest. So I think that's one option. I know that there are many others, but I think we have to think in combination the product challenge, the technological challenge, the governance challenge, and the economic, the so to say business case, also to avoid wrong incentives from any of these areas coming into the project. So that's all I want to say at this stage. I have been following this for quite a long time, and I'm happy to see the progress. Thank you very much. I don't hear you, Rufo. I hear nothing.
Apologies. Okay, so thank you so much, Paul, for these great insights. And of course, the governance. At the end of the day, it's everything boils down to the governance, as we said at the beginning, because ultimately, the resilience, the democratic accountability of this governance, how much it will be democratic and sustainably remain so in the future, in its evolution, with a lot of pressures from states and powers and economic powers. It's a very challenging design. And so you nail it really well, also like Camila said yesterday. And so that's not just to briefly mention it, where one of the ways to avoid this pressure is to create accountability, democratic accountability globally without necessarily needing nations. So the nation states don't have the kind of leverage, the first nation that comes to the table to actually set the rules and kind of skew it and take control of it. And so by having the option to go without nation states, you can actually protect yourself from initial pressures from nations to do that. And so in fact, that's how our governance is structured, with former global parliamentarians, randomly selected citizens, and scientific experts which are ethically designed, which can provide competency and democratic accountability without involving governments. And another major challenge of governance is if you're going to create governments joining in, and they have to have equal weight on the decision making in this global body to set standards and set lawful access. It may be like influential, it would be quite influential body. Then you have a nation like Israel with 6 million citizens, and you have a nation like China with 1 billion. How are you going to weight the global, the voting? So this may be very challenging, and this last thing that I mentioned may be one of the reasons that this may work better initially as a Western alliance. And it's also aligned with an historical fact that with Biden, now there's a will, a tendency, and an incentive to come together. But of course, we don't want to create a block against somebody, right? Because I think that US and the West have problems with autocracy, which are not as large as China, but are quite big. So we have not so much to create blocks which really are so different. So let me pass on the word now to Christian with his great experience on the creation of the laws. Now with the EDPS, it created legislation which has become an example globally, on setting at least a basic standard for privacy, on a commercial level. And this has been cherished. Many nations are copying this, but also I've read the document that Christian helped wrote together with Buttarelli, that basically it seems like that's where you're just starting, right? Because the plans now, what we need to do is goes much further.
Well, yes, thank you, Rufo. I suppose I'm speaking now from a nostalgic perspective of my previous role in EDPS, because I'm now working in the Commission in DG Connect on cybersecurity and data policy. Everything is connected. I think that was the main message from the Buttarelli manifesto. what he was doing, I think, with his project in the latter part of his life was to see the connections between digitalization and social norms and social problems and challenges like inequality, which is getting worse, and also the threat to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, which unfortunately, frankly speaking, are all in retreat across the world, and it's difficult to have discussions on cybersecurity and on trust in systems or trustless systems, and even indeed on data protection without looking at the wider framework for democracy and the rule of law. What I mean is that if you have laws which are in place which nominally protect the rights and interests of individuals or groups, etc., those laws will only be as effective as the court system, the access to justice which prevails within that jurisdiction. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, in many parts of the world, including in the West, is an increasing number of people who are excluded from accessing, from getting justice and from having their rights under the GDPR, for example, respected and enforced. If you look at how difficult it is for an individual to get to court when they believe that they've been subject to a violation, the most famous litigator is Max Schrems, but he will tell you that it's cost him at least €50,000 just to bring a court case, and he of course has a very high profile and he's getting a lot of funding, but that's not a luxury which is available to most citizens. So this is the wider framework, and then this is all set against an environmental crisis which has the effect of first of all exacerbating inequalities and the problems of access to justice, which I've just mentioned, but also increasing dependence on digital tools and services such as the one that we're using now. And the interesting thing was at the beginning of the pandemic, when suddenly everybody was transferring their professional lives and social lives onto platforms like Zoom, it became clear that we were relying on systems which were far from secure. Now Zoom has done a lot to improve their security since then, but it did highlight the inherent risks in digitalization when there is a prioritization of connectivity and affordability over security. Now that brings me on to my last point that I wanted to make, which is that when we talk about accountability in cyberspace, we have to talk about and we talk about the role of nation states and of governments and of companies. We have to talk about the growing concentration of market power within the digital space. So you can certainly see this in China, where their response to they've allowed a handful of companies to become incredibly powerful platforms who are in control of communications, of e-commerce, of access to information, and the response in China in authoritarian regimes is to use authoritarian tools to discipline CEOs who they think have become too powerful. And you saw that in November last year when Jack Ma simply disappeared after there was just on the eve of the scheduled initial public offering of Ant Group. Now, in democracies, what tools do we have in place when there are companies which seem so big that they can ignore democracy, that they can treat democratic representatives with contempt? What can we do when when the CEO of Facebook refuses to appear and answer questions before parliaments around the world, except with the exception of the US Congress, at the same time as moving aggressively into those markets and in effect taking over the internet. Most people's experience of the internet is mediated by a company like Facebook. So these are the fundamental problems that we face at the moment. I think that the initiatives such as yours are extremely interesting, and they play a role. But there are these big questions which democracies, and it really does need to be democracies that come together and try to answer, of how to ensure that the rule of law applies equally to all actors, whether it's nation states or monopoly companies or private citizens, and we need to ensure that that democratic processes are in place, so that when we do adopt laws and standards, that they can actually be they can actually be enforced consistently and predictably.
So thanks a lot, Christian, for these comments and analysis, and which are quite sweeping, touching on so many points. And so, no, of course, now the GDPR and the problems in actually enforcing it and being able to use it to protect one's right, that's really something that is quite a challenge. It was not foreseen for those that designed it. They didn't know it was going to be so difficult, or maybe it was the end of some lobby. Maybe it was not by accident. And so hopefully the new legislations in Europe will be better, and because now the stakes are getting so much higher. So I think that really there's so much pressure on European Union to have new legislation. What you're saying about big tech, no, you're saying they're too big to be regulated, and so basically they're just so powerful that, and in fact, now that's one of the assumptions of our project, is that one of the reasons to create a new digital sphere with new standards and new technologies is that there's not going to be any way to regulate the current ones, because they're just too powerful, too much economic power, and too much lobby power. And so that's not going to be possible. And so building a parallel universe, that's one way to go about this. So this is, I think all that you're saying is very much on spot. And so I would like to go back to Troels, which mentioned before about this is contacts with many governments around the world to bring them together to actually come out with standards that could bring more security to our systems and so on. So in the current scenario that we were just mentioned about this huge big tech, which have incredible power. So the power over the world on the media shaping our consensus is really accruing on a few large giants. Of course, the advertising, the buy advertising time to sell a candidate, sell an idea, those are important. But this big tech group not only have this direct power over the consensus, but they also have a control over the security of the systems that make their feeds. So we have no idea how the feeds are done. Not only we don't have transparency, but we have no idea who's hacking onto them to change them. So we know that you can I can buy the ads, so that I invest 50,000 to influence you, Troels, right, of your thing. And so the power of the world is not in a 1%. The power of the world is in the 0.001%. So it's very, very different. And so this may actually create an opportunity, because it's not the 99 against the 1% of power. It's the 99.99 against the 0.01%. And this could create strange bedfellows. For example, our project, Troels, started out in Porto Alegre at the first World Social Forum, right? So, and the World Social Forum was created in opposition to World Economic Forum, right? It had quite some hopes, it had some success, and then it fell into control of some Leninist people. But anyway, that's a long story. So this created a large opportunity, because a lot of the remaining part of the 1% has been getting quite rich with their stocks in tech getting larger, right? So now with the COVID, the 9 trillion were printed and all the 1% got fat, but they have no power, right? So they're wealthy, but they have no control. Really, the power is coming in the hands of a few dozens. So this could actually create an opportunity for basically power, private power and democracies to come together and actually put some beef behind it, behind actually creating a global democratic digital sphere, which is more in the interest of not only distributing power and having more democracy, but mostly to actually save this world, right? Because these people which are in control and have this huge power don't seem to be responsible, don't seem to have the control. They're not even in control of the situation. So basically, we're talking very high sphere here, but basically that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to have this much interest that there is recently to create some new multilateralism in the Western world, in the cyber sphere, and all this willingness to do it. And so to what extent you see that the wider actors involved in this actually coming after building together a new digital social contract, now at least for the West?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rufo. It's an interesting question. I also listened very carefully to what Christian and Paul said. And first of all, I think Christian said that everything will be connected, and that's true. But everything will be connected. Everything will be sensing. Everything will be stored. Everything will be used or sold. So privacy is under heavy attack because we, let's say, voluntarily give away the majority of our whereabouts and where we are and what we say and what we like. And that also is more or less hosted by big companies. We had a Danish tech ambassador, by the way, as one of the first countries who had a tech ambassador in Silicon Valley. He was hired by Microsoft, by the way, and he's now I think a lobbyist in Brussels or working for. And again, it just tells you that there are enormous amount of power. And another question is, what happens to the law if the law cannot be enforced? And my claim is today that we cannot enforce the law. We have a law saying that cybercrime is illegal, but it cannot be enforced because law enforcement cannot work together. So we need to do it in a different way. And if you look at security, privacy, and integrity, at these three areas, then we are always talking about security. But I'm actually also very much concerned about privacy and integrity. What happens to everything in this new world where everything is connected? And there is face recognition, there are signals that my iPhone follows me all over, everything I like, everything I read, everything I say, everything I exchange. And I think, is there also a rule for what can we trust on the internet? Face swap and voice swap is very easy. And as you just said, Rufo, you can basically hack opinions, hearts and minds by singling out me as a specific victim based on my social democratic efforts, that I may be a male, I might be divorced, I might be unemployed, I might be with a lower income or lower education. What is it that you want to give me? So I want to be more anti-immigration or anti-gay or anti-whatever you want. So I think that there are a number of let's say, challenges for us to deal with. And the problem is that the magnitude of the challenge is so big that you always start off with the questions, how do you eat an elephant? You know, and you start by chopping it up in smaller bits, right? And that is why I think that we probably need to identify areas where we can do a meaningful difference. And as you also heard me say that when I traveled and spoke to a very high level official from the Chinese cyberspace agency and the Minister of Interior in Russia and the White House in the US and the head of GCHQ in UK and the Cyber Directorate Chief in Tel Aviv, there was a willingness to work together. I think that everybody instinctively know that we need to cooperate at least to minimize crime. What is it that nation states does to counter crime? They do three things. They do prevention, protection, and prosecution. Right now, prosecution is out of the question because we do not prosecute anybody in cyber crime because we don't catch anybody. So you're back to prevention and protection. And that is why protection, as you are now trying to promote, is so important, because what happens to the law when the law cannot be enforced? Then you are alone in the trench. And we need to create tools for businesses and governments to exchange data without being a victim of crime. And that is why I think it's so important that we at least find a common solution. I think you're right in not trying to do it globally in the beginning, but trying to do it as a, let's say, a platform of the willing amongst Western countries, and then other ones can join if they want to. Otherwise, I think you set yourself up for failure if you try to take the whole globe in the first step. So it's a very good way of chopping up the elephant, is to start with somebody and then have a win-win situation and a quick win, and then move on from there. And I hope, and I wish you all the best luck. And I think that you have actually a good opportunity right now to do so.
Thank you so much, Troels, for these comments, and again for the great appreciation of our project, and also for mentioning attribution and how important it is to make systems more secure, because it's just so hard to attribute. So basically, there are no laws to prosecute attackers. Primarily, there are no international laws because it's just so hard to do attribution. So you couldn't create. This is one of the problems that we have, and so. One of the, I mean, since you have no way to prosecute the attackers, as I'm paraphrasing what you said, you can't solve the problem by deterrence, right? You cannot solve it so much by deterrence because you cannot prove attribution, or maybe you have attribution, but you would disclose certain information, like US, under intelligence scenario, and so even for cyber peace. One of the best things you can do is make sure that more and more nations have more secure critical infrastructure, so that they don't have a small cyber gang in Russia that can bring down the whole capital pipeline, right? And so if that's not the case, then it's harder. The other thing that also, and this is part of the panel that we'll be discussing actually next, we're kind of like moving into that, is that by creating standards which are radically more secure. On one way, you just create the accident less likely, and only really top states can do it. So it's easier to get to it, and you have less accidents. But you can also design it to be forensic friendly by design. So systems nowadays are not designed to be forensic friendly. So you can have the logging, the systems. So you can have forensic friendliness built into the systems in the standards, so that it's not going to solve it completely, but it can at least help and reduce that. And so in one way, I mean, what we're doing, it's not going to solve cyber peace, it's not going to solve that cyber attribution, but it could be a part of that. So we have 10 minutes. So I would like to open the floor to some questions before we open up the other panel. So if there are some questions of someone, you could just unmute yourself and start speaking, or you want to type it in the chat. But I guess we are in a small group, so I think Nick, had something to say, or Elizabeth Ferguson, which also has quite some experience in this area, or Mike Nelson also.
I have one question. How do you solve the problem of false attribution by actors? Let's say a nation state wants to go after a certain individual or target, and what they can do, because attribution is so flimsy, is create fake attribution against them, or just claim to have done so, and then try to use the international laws to then go after them if those are created. What mechanics could exist to prevent such misuse?
Well, somebody who wants to take this question? I don't know, Troels or Paul.
I can give it a shot. I agree with Damien that attribution is not the easiest thing that we have in the world, and that is also something we need to work on. And I also agree that we could have false attribution. And then we go back to the member states that we want to have in this group here. There needs to be some trust to the legal system, at least, that they do some kind of, let's say, checks and balances against law enforcement, as we have in normal countries. And if there's any doubt, the doubt will come then to the defendants, and you know, that he will get the benefit of that. So I think that the only thing we can do is to work together with countries that we trust, that has a system that we trust in. And that is, of course, a big question. But that, I think, is the only way that we can go through this. And that will then probably not include what security intelligence services does, but law enforcement, they need to openly, you know, put forward their evidence and the way that they have, you know, got hold of it and how they have forensically admitted it. And if there's any doubt, then of course a judge needs to say, okay, I let the doubt go to the benefit of the prosecutor or of the defendant. And I think that is the only way that you can do that in this way. I don't think you have a bulletproof system in any systems.
I might also jump in. Hi, Nick Kelly here. Chris Painter mentioned.
Nick is one of the executive committee members. Oh, we introduced briefly Nick earlier on. So thanks, Nick.
No worries. Thank you. I remember Chris Painter in one of the previous sessions mentioned something about attribution being more of a political ploy. In truth, post-breach digital forensics and application is exceptionally sophisticated, and there are many markers that can very, very highly, with high confidence, pinpoint who exactly is behind the attack, or at least, if it's not an individual, then an individual group based on certain markers within the code, within the control, the command and control servers. The complexity lies with the motivation for the political finger pointing, but then also the protections as well. I just want to mention something else interesting that impacts a lot of these discussions, which is having I would say like a structural backdoor in systems like the Anom, the whole Anom scenario. So to take you back to 3 years ago, the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, and the FBI hatched a plan to set up their own phone network, and this is after an inside source who was on a number of charges decided to do a deal with the FBI and actually create this phone service itself. It was distributed by undercovers to various criminals, and so they did mitigate to a very large degree the collateral impact in that sense, in the immediate sense. About 10,000 phones are distributed, probably 1,500 phones in Australia and all around the world now. First of all, an interesting thing, the United States couldn't actually prosecute for a number of reasons. And second of all, they had to actually host the server in what is very likely a non-liberal democracy in order to justify the copying of the purportedly encrypted messages that were flying around. So what would they do without that third country that didn't have the proper legislation? So it's very useful to have a nice country which doesn't abide by your own regulations in order to shove some of the dirty work. And this is a cyber example, but of course this example props up in other, in other instances where it might be more physical, where it might be a location like, I don't know, Guantanamo Bay, or other instances where it is very, very useful to have something that's not on home turf. What happens? Do we eradicate these systems? That was something that I really wanted to bring up as well, because I thought it was quite pertinent.
So thanks, Nick, for this last comment on Anom, which is really very interesting for the matter of what we're discussing. discussing, and this opens up, of course, now more geopolitical complex issues of having rogue nations that are actually then instrumental for certain aspects. So I think we're closing to the time to opening the follow-up panel. So if there's a last question that someone may have for some of the speakers. Okay, so I would just add one thing to close. Damian, I think the first question, Daniel Roots, he brought in a really great issue in which possibly the greatest risk we are facing is not really not being able to attribute a cyber incident, but it's misattribution. So it's the problem of difficulty attribution. It's less than the easiness of misattribution. Sure, because if you can have malicious actors that can construct attribution to somebody else, then they can actually create a war. They create a cyber incident and create a war. And so the brokenness of current technologies and standards makes so that actors, even not state or well-funded, could actually engage in very sophisticated action and misattribute it to some other actor, and so this could actually be even more dangerous. And so I guess this is a perfect opening for the next session. Okay, I think that we do have another question. I think yeah, Mike. Yes. Is Mike?
Mike Nelson with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and it's a little unfair to ask this at the last minute with 2 minutes left, but
well, no, actually take your time, because we can move on to, we can move on 5 minutes. It's not like we're in Switzerland, but we're not that Swiss. So
okay. I worked in the Clinton White House and was the point person on the Clipper chip initiative, which was mentioned earlier. We've had a lot of discussion about attribution, which is very hard, but there's a much harder question, which is, whom do you trust? Troels mentioned this, and it really is a hard problem. Even if the United States decides that they can share certain types of information or can share encryption keys with another law enforcement organization at the national level, they might not feel comfortable sharing it with somebody at the provincial level. The other problem is, of course, even bigger, which is, so which countries are going to be inside the trusted circle? And I would like to hear from Troels or anybody else. Is there a model? Is SWIFT the model? Is there some place where that politically impossible choice has been made, that these are trusted countries, these are trusted agencies, and these are not?
I don't think I've seen any model. I think you've seen Five Eyes works together with allies that are close to each other. They speak the same language. They have a long tradition for cooperating. I think that they have a very, very good cooperation. I know in the intelligence service, you have something called the Bern Club. That is also a club for some like-minded nation states that will exchange more. And I also know that in law enforcement, we have what we call the JCAT, the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force, that consists around 16 countries that exchange very, very much and very, very solid intelligence between each other because they trust each other. But it's very much about old boys network methodology. You are reluctant to take in new states and new actors. And I think it works, but it doesn't work perfectly. That's why we need to find another model that can survive my friendship with a French guy or an American guy that will give us access. We need to have a system that works. And I think it's just as difficult, Mike, as attribution to create that, to be honest. And I don't know how you will do it, but I think that you could at least start between like-minded nations. So the EU states are to a certain extent like-minded, but not all of EU states. So even when I worked in the European Union in Europol, we had the opportunity to actually squeeze out some countries inside the union that we didn't want to share information with. And we need to do that because the alternative, if we didn't have that possibility, was that we wouldn't exchange anything with anybody, right? So you needed to say, I will exchange with Germany and with UK and France, but maybe not with Hungary or Poland or whatever. That And I think the only thing you can do in the beginning is to build trust, create that possibility, and then hopefully, expand that circle. But I don't see that we can have a global system that will work. It will never, ever work.
I fully agree with you, but I also think that transparencies and oversight are keys for building trust. And the US, although it's accused of being much more involved in surveillance, isn't really. It's just that we don't have any transparency or oversight into what's going on in certain European countries.
No, and I would say that
this decision is quite extraordinary when viewed from this side of the Atlantic, because we know that there's lots of countries doing exactly the same thing that the US is doing, and yet we're the ones who are singled out.
Yeah, but I think, Mike, to your credit, and I know it's not something that I can give you real comfort, but I can say as a receiver of information from the United States monitoring ability, that I must say that we have tackled enormous amounts of very important cases with that information that we got access to, because we have a good relationship with the United States, and we are grateful for that. I think, and I think you cannot always say that, because this is excluded from openness and transparency in some cases. But that's also part of the picture, is that it's very valuable to have a good and trusted relationship between some.
Well, I think a lot of Europeans and Americans would be much more supportive of surveillance if they understood all the benefits that have been provided. And Rufo mentioned some of them. But the current mindset is that everything has to be kept secret. And you're not going to build political support for the current system if there isn't more transparency into the results of the surveillance, not the methods and the targets, but the results. And that's unfortunately, there's a lot of history and decades of people just trying to keep everything totally clamped down. Thank you very much, Rufo. This has been quite interesting, and I particularly like this panel. The last panel was profound as well.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Mike, for these comments, and please stay on, because we're opening now, merging this panel with the new panel, the next panel, which is the last panel is actually touching upon what we've been discussing about the impact of more secure standards on attribution, and we're mixing a few different things here. On one side, your discussion with Troels is about who do you trust about attribution and how sharing information, creating this club about information. And whereas there's also alliances among nations about standards for communication. For example, in Europe there is SOGA-yes, in which European nations validate the highest standards of communication within each nation, so that they can support communications at the highest levels of classification with similar systems. And so I think the collaboration could happen at many different levels. One thing that I think Mike touched upon now, which I think is key to the overall discussion that we've been having here as Free and Safe. I saw one video in which you, Mike, mentioned the fact that it's a bad idea to get engaged in a conversation where your most important good points are classified. And so that was very, I think, very insightful, because I mean, you recognized several times that the experience of Clipper chip had many it had many flaws. It was miscommunicated. It had many more good things than it was that it had. But it was overall it was not a well-conceived way. But you follow the conversation and the discussion over the years, and it never really went anywhere, because I mean the problem that the Clipper chip was trying to solve never went away. It just got bigger. And so basically that I think that that initial unsuccess, which was a communication in success, or it was also technical and conceptual, possibly. And so that basically did not basically set a direction to the discussion that never actually led anywhere. You had these crypto wars, so-called, in which you had privacy associates trying to block the governments to create backdoors, while in the process, governments have been forced to have backdoors everywhere.
Unfortunately, the whole debate also deflected attention away from the whole question of authentication, and it destroyed the trust and the collaboration that was needed to build effective privacy-enhancing authentication and attribute management systems. We could have done so much to improve cybersecurity if 20 years ago we had been able to make progress on that problem, the problem of digital identity. We're still trying to catch up on that one.
Can you expand on that? I think I'm speaking also from all the others. In what way you think that we could have done better on the authentication and the identity?
Well, we haven't had the leadership needed to define some kind of interoperable digital identity system. And equally important, we could have by now a number of systems that could manage my attributes and verify that I'm over the age of 60 and that I'm male and that I live in a certain province. I mean, there's a bunch of things that could be done that wouldn't actually be an identity system, but would give me the ability to prove that I have certain attributes. And so there's just a long list of good ideas out there for digital identity that we've only seen implemented in a few countries. And we don't have a global system, and maybe a very long time until we do. So I think we focus so much on encryption, and there's been so much back and forth and so much distrust that we've missed the chance to do a lot more on digital identity. And right, so we're stuck having to rely on Facebook and Apple to be our identification system. Those are not privacy enhancing ID systems.
Yes, so I think this is very interesting, and this connects back to what Troels was saying before about the difficulty of. Okay, let me see. I think Troels is on.
No, he had to drop off, unfortunately.
He had to drop off. Okay, good. So it connects to what Troels used to say before: is that current IT standards make so that you can have you can have a fake identity, you can have a fake biometrics. So the standards surrounding authentication and identification of persons are too weak, and so the problem is not only a problem of privacy, but it's also a problem of authentication, which also spins off on the economy, being able to sign a contract digitally. I know I've been working for the last 30 years. I've never signed a contract digitally. I still just sign a PDF because that never was able to work, because it was never able to create levels of authentication which were most trustworthy, because of all the insecurities over there. But I really want to take this opportunity because your experience is so central to our mission, right? The free and safe, and you've been so at the center of this. I really would like to know, based on what you've seen so far. Now we actually got in touch a couple of weeks ago in a conference. The possibility that what the problem you try to solve with CryptoChip could actually be solved at a transnational level, because one of the criticisms of CryptoChip was the fact, well, if you create it in nation states, why should any criminal actually use it some other way? They will use some other systems. The other idea is that this could not be applied to all technologies, not trying to resolve the problem of law enforcement of all IT, but actually become an instrument to make so that super secure stuff can go in the market. And so you're applying this front door mechanism only to super secure systems. So you have a scale which is different. You have systems which are much more secure, and so therefore the mechanism also can be made more secure. And so So basically, I'm not basically your attempt is different from what we're trying to do, right? So our main goal is how do we have meaningfully secure stuff in the market, and so we have to have extreme safeguards. And by the way, we can apply these extreme safeguards to the mechanism and make it procedural. So what we're doing is this is a stark opposition to what you did with the Clipper chip, is to create a procedural access. So we assume that any user of a super secure client device will need to have data recovery or key recovery, because they will have the most important information there. The user may die or they may lose his passphrase. They need to have data recovery. So you have a server side, the repository somewhere that can be hacked. That same repository, which you have, is a problem you have anyway, that can be used to have an in-person process. And so you isolate yourself from, technology is full of holes, to have a mechanism which is more procedural and so on. And so, of course, then you have a governance of this. You started this your intervention with saying who you trust. So at this point, you need to have this international governance body that should be trusted by the nations to be in your best interest. And I think that the main question for a nation to come on board says, okay, well, now I'm a powerful nation. I can crack in any system I want. And with these systems, I would have to knock on the door. And so I would have to demonstrate to someone that I have legitimate authority. Why should I get into it? And one of the answers we give, we cite Rami Efrati, which was the head of cyber division of the Israel prime minister, that he was quoting the fact that even though powerful nations like the United States, Israel, Germany can hack on pretty much any device one way or the other, the evidence they get is not solid enough. For example, in Italy, France, and Germany, evidence acquired through malware and Trojans, it's not accepted, because you cannot eliminate the reasonable doubt that others may have hacked into it and tampered with the evidence. And so you have this problem in Italy, Germany, and France, so much so that the Ministry of Interior of Germany and France had a joint press release asking for something to be done about it, because they couldn't even use that evidence. And of course, in the US, parallel construction is used, but that doesn't fly so well, and it creates a lot of collateral damage. So in general, with the huge experience you have in this area, how do you see the chances and the challenges of creating something like that to create secure systems out there?
As you said earlier, and other people commented, the Clipper ship did about everything wrong. Technology, the procedure, the communications. I have not seen any effort that really is going to solve the problems that I see developing between now and 2025. And I'm very concerned that a lot of the systems are being designed only with people in mind. And if you're just trying to authenticate and secure my personal communications, I'll spend some money and make some effort to do that. But if I have a 5-cent chip that's sending some sensitive data, it's going to be very hard to build $10 worth of security onto that $5 chip, a 5-cent chip. So I hope we'll kind of work with the simplest case and build up from that, rather than doing what we normally do, which is look where the need is greatest and solve the problem for a $1,000 device where we can spend $10 on security. But if I had the answer to your question and had the team to implement it, I would be very wealthy. But I do think we have to keep these visions. We have to keep talking about the visions we can build, and get to the core choices that we have to make. And that's what bothers me most, is that there's a lot of magical thinking where people seem to believe that technology can do anything. It can do it for free. It can do it by tomorrow. And that means that you can list 15 or 8 different principles and priorities and somehow achieve them all with no compromise. That doesn't happen. But the politicians are not willing to admit that. They're not willing to admit that there's a limited amount of money, and that the physics and the math just don't let you do certain things. You can't, I mean, you've laid this all out. I mean, it is a problem. You can't give everybody bulletproof, impossible to decrypt encryption, and at the same time have 100% transparency for your intelligence community. Make a choice.
Exactly. Yes, that's it's definitely, I mean, so we are proponents of win-win solutions, but we don't pretend that you have a perfect win-win solution in which you can maximize both needs. We're saying that—
I'm not saying that you do. I'm saying that your competition is a fantasy technology that will never exist. That's your competition. Sure. You're trying to push forward with an idea that could work, and other people are saying, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you use a fantasy technology that will do everything? Yeah, exactly. There's some of these new emerging technologies. So I need to like put some order, because, you know, basically on the panel was supposed to start 15 minutes ago and talk mostly about the impact of IT security standards on cyber peace. That said, I think, you know, the opportunity to have you, Mike, you know, is just so interesting for us and all the people in the panel. So we have Paul Nemitz that it was part of this panel, and so we'll fluidly let Paul come in. I think he also wrote a question or suggestion on the chat. So Paul, would you like to jump in?